Welcome to the Long Covid podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long Covid podcast. I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Harry Leeming, who is the CEO and co-founder of Visible, which is developing tools to use data to manage illness. And there's a lot more to it than that, which we're going to get into today, which I'm really excited to do. So a very warm welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to finally do this. So to start with, would you mind just saying a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I previously was an engineer. I spent some time working in Formula One and then went out to San Francisco. I was working in some very early stage tech companies there. And then, moved back to London a couple of years ago, just in time for the pandemic. And then my long COVID journey, which is a similar story to a lot of people. I was a fit and healthy 29-year-old. My holidays were climbing mountains. I was cycling across countries, pretty fit and healthy and active. So when I got sick in, I think September 2020, so beginning of the second wave, didn't think too much of it. But classically, a few weeks into my infection, things started going downhill. I had severe dysautonomia, severe brain fog, fatigue. It's definitely points where I wasn't even able to stand. And over the last 2 years, I have got a bit better, but certainly been very frustrated with how little recognition, treatment, and really support that there's been on what's been a really tough journey. Similar to yourself, Jackie, trying to navigate the healthcare system, and it's been alarming to find out that my story isn't that different to anyone else's, and we've got a massive amount of people affected. I think the latest estimate, 65 million, 100 million people worldwide, and then even more alarming to find out that long COVID isn't new. We've known about these conditions for decades. The MEs, fibromyalgia, chronic Lyme. And so having come across this world and the journey that I've been on, I really was like, this is crazy that there isn't any tools really to help you manage your condition.
Yeah, like you say, it was a bit of an eye-opener for, like you, I was quote unquote fit, healthy, active around about the same age as you when I got hit. And I'd never experienced illness really in my life beyond colds and stuff that I got all the time. And it was kind of like opening a door to a whole kind of new world that, as I said, I was very privileged to never have sort of witnessed. And it was eye-opening and kind of
terrifying, right?
Yeah, overwhelming, to kind of realize that all these people who had been ill for so much longer, and it was kind of like, whoa.
No, totally. And I guess I just hadn't thought what the words chronic illness really meant, and I didn't think it was possible to be ill every single day. And so it's been eye-opening.
Yeah, definitely. And I have a new sort of awareness of other people's suffering almost, I think.
Definitely. I think empathy is the one bit of wisdom I've acquired over the last couple of years, is not fully understanding what other people can be going through.
Yes, definitely. And I guess that kind of brings us on to the kind of, we call them invisible illnesses, don't we? And this kind of illness where you can look okay, but not feel okay. Yeah. And that is something that I think has been quite difficult for people around me to understand that, they can look at me and be like, well, you look fine, and not quite understand how hurtful that can feel to somebody who may look okay, but they certainly don't feel okay.
And this is like the big challenge for us. It's like, how do we navigate that? How do we change the narrative around these conditions? And I'm really optimistic that we're only going to understand these conditions more, and the more we understand them, the more they'll be recognized. But I think a big missing piece here is that we need objective data that shows that we're ill. I think like the need for a biomarker in these conditions is huge, because once we can measure it, then we can start moving things forwards in terms of like treatments, research.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you're right. Biomarkers data is really useful because you can use it to kind of track and to show what's going on. But there's also a little part of me that goes, but why should I need data for someone to believe me when I say that I'm not well?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of me that kind of goes, about the need for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look back at history, it's a classic error that we make, right? We've done the same with MS. Before we had MRI scans, we thought people with MS were malingerers. Same with asthma. Before we had steroids, we thought that was caused by anxiety. So a story as old as time, the less we understand a condition, the more that we attribute it to them being psychosomatic.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
And I think we're in a difficult position now where we have actually managed to find biomarkers in so many conditions that the ones that are left behind, we're like, well, they must be psychosomatic. We can't find a biomarker in 2023. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And it's something that, a version of that we're trying to tackle with Visible.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, let's talk about Visible. I guess, yeah, what's the story behind it?
So I guess along my journey, there's been many steps where I've just been like, this is crazy that nothing has been built to help people with these conditions. And I remember seeing my doctor in the first couple of weeks, months, and my tests were all coming back normal. But I could see from the data on my fitness tracker, like showing that there was something very wrong with me, and that my body was not responding correctly to external stresses. And then, move on another couple of weeks. I'm trying to exercise my way out of this condition. And in fact, like I pretty much prescribed myself Get, and I pushed myself hard enough that, after a couple of days, I actually checked myself into A&E. My symptoms have become so severe. And then I started from then on, essentially learning the hard way around pacing, that I was using my fitness tracker now to help me to pace myself, to help me to rest, which is like the opposite of what it's designed for. So, every step of the way, I was using this like really powerful device, but I was using it in completely the wrong ways. I was using it in the context of illness, not fitness. And so a year ago, I was well enough to be able to start Visible, and we're using wearable technology to help patients to measure and manage their own condition. So measuring them through the digital biomarkers, what we call them, but these sort of illness-specific insights. So being able to look into like dysautonomia and capture that through wearable data. Time spent upright, for example, is a really good metric, when particularly towards the severe end, and correlating with symptom severity. And then on the management side, being able to answer those questions, like what amount of activity is safe for me that's going to reduce my chances of a symptom flare up, like what interventions are making me better, what are making me worse, and helping patients on that journey.
Yeah, and we were talking just a little before we actually started recording about how Visible is being built, and the sort of collaboration aspect, and involving not just a token amount of people with lived experience, but I mean like yourself, who is like heading up the whole thing, as well as all the people that are involved. So I would love to talk a little bit about the process, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're doing at Visible is different in a few ways. So I think we're in a unique situation where, suddenly with long COVID, we have a lot of people that need a lot of help and support, and they really need it right now. They needed it 3 years ago. And I think most other companies would wait until what they've built is perfect and it works great before they release it to everyone else to use. And we don't really have that luxury in this situation where we really need to move faster and we want to get things out as quickly as possible. And so we've taken, a bit of a risk in being really open about what we're building at Visible and getting it out there when it's, there's still got bugs, there's still lots more to build and improve upon. But really, we've done it so that we can make these changes faster. But like, as you mentioned, also so we can build it with the community. I mean, we have half our team have either long COVID and ME. So like, we do have a good sense of what's needed, but they are such diverse conditions that we want to be careful we're not projecting our journeys too much into the app, and that we're really taking on board like the whole community's experience so that we're building stuff for everyone, useful for everyone. And so, yeah, I mean, the community has been really awesome to see the community get involved in the amount of feedback that we've had, and really like that helped us build Visible faster with like an incredible amount of data, which really makes a difference. So if there's an opportunity to say thank you to everyone who's been beta testing Visible, I'll definitely take it now and say, on behalf of the whole team, like, we really, really appreciate it. And to add that, we try and write a blog post every 2 weeks so that everyone can keep up with the progress. And we're really open about what we've been working on and what we're working on next.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think what you were saying about not projecting our own kind of experiences onto it. I mean, I think we possibly can all be guilty of that, where we think, well, this is long COVID because this is what I'm experiencing. And, then when I'll speak to somebody else whose, symptoms are presenting in a completely different way, and I go, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's completely different. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it can be a thing that we do, I think. It's not deliberate, I'm sure, but I guess by having more people involved, you can kind of counter that maybe.
No, totally. And I mean, there's an example of that. Like, fatigue isn't my main symptom. So, and that's one that affects, I think, nearly 70% of people with long COVID. So, it's really important as we're building it that we're taking into account that experience.
Yeah, definitely. But I also love what you were saying about around 50% of your team being people that are experiencing chronic illness of some description. And I think a lot of employers should be listening to this episode because, this is a perfect example of how people with chronic illness are not worthless. They're not useless. They can work, but they have to work in a way that is flexible enough to work for them. And, this has been something that I've seen time and time again, is people not being able to do their jobs because they're not able to do it flexibly. And, for sure, there are some jobs that you can't do flexibly, but there are so many that can. So I think, it's a real perfect example of that, I think, which is awesome.
Yeah, we've been really lucky in that we've been able to build the company from the ground up with that in mind. We do everything remotely. We do everything asynchronously. And there's a lot of tools out there now that we can use to, record, videos to each other or record audio notes, and using that. So we don't require, you have to be up at 9 o'clock for, a weekly stand-up, which would be the classic meeting that would usually exist in a startup. So yeah, we have built that flexibility in to the whole company, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So I'd love to get a bit more into Visible, and can we talk a bit about how sort of practically it works for people with chronic illness?
Yeah, so we can talk about, there's two parts to Visible. So we've got our free app that you can download from the App Store right now. And then we have our wearable subscription we call Visible Plus, which we're currently using with a very small group of beta testers. We've just got 200 people using that right now. And we're hoping to expand that over the next coming months. Now, the free app doesn't require a wearable. And what we do is in the morning, we can pull out some of your key insights about your body. And we can do that through your smartphone camera. So using a 60-second reading where you put your finger on the lens of your smartphone, we can pull out your heart rate and also heart rate variability, which gives you a really good indicator of how you're doing today versus your baseline. And then we also have the ability for you to track your other symptoms, and then also exertion, so not just physical, but cognitive and emotional, and then also other factors that influence your condition. So for women who have periods, the menstrual cycle can have a massive impact on symptoms. And so the ability for you to see what's making you better, what's making you worse, how much capacity have you got for activity during the day. And we also have a section in the app where you can keep up with like the latest research of what's going on. And in the future, you'll actually be able to opt in to share your data directly with researchers, which we're really excited about. We're having some really exciting conversations about, and we're hoping to have that available in the coming months. And then for our wearable integration, so Visible Plus, this is where we're using real-time stream of heart rate data to be able to help you manage your rest, your activity, your pacing. And also we're building out now is these digital biomarkers that I talked about. So being able to help people to measure their condition as well as manage it.
Yeah. Can we talk about the digital biomarkers? So what is a digital biomarker? Because this is fascinating me.
Yes. So I guess there's another way of like phrasing it is like an illness specific insight. So it is like a pattern that you see in the data that only exists in sick people versus healthy people. So, for example, right now, if you wanted to get checked for dysautonomia, you would go do a tilt table test, or you'd do a NASA lean test. And that is, for those that don't know, where you lie down for a couple of minutes and then you stand up and you'll record your heart rate changes as you go through that. But obviously, like you're doing that throughout the day anyway. You do that in the morning. If you're having a crash in the afternoon, that'll happen throughout the day, and we can actually capture that change in heart rate automatically, and we can track that irregular response to these stresses that only exist in long COVID but don't exist in, say, a healthy person.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about Long Covid breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you Long Covid breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. So if you had something like POTS, for example, where your heart rate had to shift by, I think, is it more than 30 beats per minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your app would track that and it would go bing or whatever notification you have.
Absolutely. And that's really why we called visible. Like we're using wearable data to make these conditions visible. So while all our tests are coming back normal, we can see that the nervous system is not functioning correctly, and using that data to not just help you to like manage your own condition, but also in the future for your friends and families. I know, Jackie, we talked a bit about this before, but sort of this misunderstanding you have from those closest to you and that dreaded question you get asked every day, like, how are you doing? But if that could be answered with objective data, then we can really bridge that gap in understanding, and then also making it visible to your clinician so that they can diagnose you and they can treat you. And then this like bigger piece, which is making it more visible to researchers so they can better study us, and then the larger vision of really changing the narrative of these conditions and making them visible so that we can shift policy around it. We can shift how these conditions are talked about.
Yeah, and that's brilliant, isn't it? Because if you've got that literally in your hand data, rather than taking 6 weeks to get an appointment with your doctor, and then when you finally do, you go in and you say, I don't feel very well, this happens, these are my symptoms, and your doctor may be quite up to date and may know some of these things, but GPs are so under pressure, I think the world round.
Yep.
They may not be up to date with the latest research on long COVID and POTS, for example. So if you were to show up and say, here is my data, it has literally shown my heart rate jumping at that much, this is called POTS, you're so much further down that kind of trajectory towards getting some help, aren't you? And that's kind of what we want, isn't it? We want people to be getting help and being able to feel better sooner rather than waiting years and years.
No, totally. And I just think the healthcare system is not set up for these conditions. I mean, they're very focused on trauma, on life-threatening, and very little time is available spent on life-limiting conditions. And really like this framework of using for a long-term fluctuating conditions, like it doesn't make sense to go see a doctor for 20 minutes and then have no contact with them for a couple of months and see them again. Like you want to capture what's going on in between. And so like that's how wearables are so powerful for these conditions and being able to do that. And I think empowering patients to measure and manage their own condition and really like push forwards this knowledge like back into like the medical community, I think is going to be a way for us to speed up knowledge with your GPs, with your primary care providers.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you're collecting all this data kind of, minute to minute or second to second, I guess, which must be a huge amount of data. That's amazing. That's kind of just filtering through my brain a little bit.
Genuinely, I think we have one of the largest data sets on long COVID and chronic and ME already.
Yeah, that must be incredible to have all of that. So I'm just kind of curious about, on a practical level, I mean, obviously collecting the data and being able to show it to clinicians and family and, people. What about, I mean, I'm kind of loath to say it, but the word self-management is one that people kind of don't seem to be hugely happy about. But, a lot of certainly what I've experienced is, we're on our own most of the time, aren't we? We see our doctor, however, not that frequently. A lot of the time, you're doing this on your own with a bit of guidance maybe from elsewhere. So sort of practically day to day, what are the sort of things that people are able to use the app for?
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on that point, I mean, we see other chronic conditions. So, diabetes, for example, we've got people measuring and managing their glucose levels, and there are the best tools available to do that. And really, like, we're building the same thing, these conditions. And the guidance that we can provide is around activity first and foremost. But it's also in helping you spot patterns in your condition so you can adjust your lifestyle around it. So, like what interventions are working, your breathing exercises, your yoga, like really being able to see the data to show you like that is working and what you should be doing more of and what you could be doing less of, and answer like all these questions we have about our condition. Like, am I getting better? Am I getting worse in the long term? Like, what's making me better? What's making me worse? And really trying to give a bit of more control back to patients.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's a really good point you just made about am I getting better? I mean, I find this myself, day to day, I'm like, I don't feel any different. I still can't do this thing I want to do. And, I still can't do that other thing I want to do. And somebody like my other half with a little bit more perspective is able to look at me and go, but you're so much better than you were 2 months ago, 4 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And I go, am I? And he was like, well, yes, because you can do this and you can do that and you're not crashing and, all of these things. And it's like, oh, yeah. Okay, because we're so kind of, when you're so in something, it's very hard to see the bigger picture, isn't it? But I suppose if you're tracking it, you're able to kind of look at your app and it will kind of show you. And we get very bogged down in the ups and downs of it. Whereas the app will be able to kind of look in a more linear way of sort of over a couple of months that won't get so bogged down in the fact that today I feel terrible, which, might be true, but, on the whole, actually, you're way better than you were a month ago, for example.
Yeah, totally. And actually, like when it comes to tracking, we do try and minimize as much as possible how much time you have to spend using the app. Certainly, like the free app right now is quite data heavy. So you do a morning check-in, takes about a minute. Evening check-in doesn't take more than 30 seconds. But we're quite strict in our framework around trying to limit how much we feel like we need to use the app to be able to get the most out of it. And what's great about Plus is and our wearable integration is that we can track all this stuff passively and continuously. So like moving to a world where, you don't have to think about your condition too much and that, where you can dive into your data, either at the end of the day or even at the end of the week, if you're doing better and be like, hey, yeah, like things are going in the right direction. Like I am making the right changes.
Yeah, and I guess that's where having people with the condition working on the project you get this in some of the research studies, don't you, where you have to fill in like a half-hour questionnaire every day, and you're just like, I can't do this. Like, you obviously haven't run this past lived experience, people, because anybody with long COVID would have told you that you cannot expect someone to do a half-hour survey every day, for example. So and your people that are working on it, that you can't be spending too much time on it, because otherwise you have to pace your app participation time, which is like starting to get a bit daft, isn't it?
Totally. And actually, we do get a lot of requests and feedback for us to add more functionality, more tracking within the app. Can we track it in the middle of the day or in the morning, in the afternoon? We've pushed back a bit against that, because we do think that the best way to get long-term data is to really like actually restrict what you're measuring to just the core things that you really need to know. And I know that can be quite frustrating, but it's really like us looking long-term at what's the best thing for these conditions.
It's a fair point, I guess, because if you're wanting regular data from as many people as possible, then you want to keep it at a level that everybody can do, I suppose, don't
Yeah.
you? If you're expecting sort of 3 or 4 track-ins a day, then 50% of people maybe won't do it. So you're going to lose that section of the data, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to think about like feedback loops. So if something is changing in your body as a result of something you did a couple of hours ago, that is something that it's more easy for us to identify. That actually, we don't really need an app to be able to help us make that connection, because it happens so quickly. But the stuff that we struggle with more to make connections with is, what did I do yesterday that's now impacting me today? And so really we're helping on like a longer time frame than being able to tell you like, that walk you went for an hour ago has made you worse now. That's where like I think we can provide less value, and so that's why we don't sort of push that more frequent tracking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And I guess things like the breathing exercise that I started doing 3 weeks ago, and it didn't seem to be making a difference at the time, but over time it has.
Yeah,
So those incremental kind of longer term changes, I guess.
and that's the bit that's really hard for you to keep track of and to be like, oh, that's actually helping.
Yeah, totally. Um, and one of the common features of long COVID, and I think probably that's in common with most chronic illnesses, is this post-exertional malaise or post-exertional symptom exacerbation, isn't it, the other one? So how can we use the app to try to avoid that? Because that's the pits, isn't it?
No, totally. And so in the free app, we've got two ways that you can do it. It is still somewhat limited. So we give you a score every morning that tells you like how much capacity have you got for activity versus your baseline. So we look back at the last 3 months of your data, and we can work out what's normal for you and your condition. And then we can see like, okay, your heart rate variability is suppressed, which is like a really good indicator that your body is struggling. And also a higher resting heart rate can also indicate that too. And we also combine that with how your sleep is and how your symptoms been for the last few weeks. And from that, we can derive a score. So we can use that to guide you. But that's only one, that only tells you at the beginning of the day. It doesn't give you that advice throughout the day. But alongside that, you're also able to spot patterns. And we have a trends tab where you can like directly compare your cognitive exertion against your symptoms, or your emotional exertion against your symptoms. So you can start to see for yourself, like, oh, my symptoms were worse because I did too much yesterday, or, the menstrual cycle started, therefore actually like it wasn't necessarily exertion that my reason is my symptoms are worse, and therefore actually maybe I do have a bit more capacity. So those are sort of things that we can do with the free app. For the Visible Plus, we have the ability to give that kind of guidance throughout the day. And so we use somewhat basic at this stage heart rate limit alerts. So we can let you set a limit, and we can tell you when you've exerted too much or too long. And the further into this we're able to start, using more complex techniques to be able to not just like reduce those crashes, but try and predict them as well, and really like try to understand your energy envelope as much as possible without triggering these larger symptom flare-ups.
Yeah, of course. And I guess if you're able to track it a bit more through the day, I mean, what I've noticed, and I think is quite common to a lot of people with dysautonomia in POTS, is this kind of not feeling good in the morning and it taking quite a lot of time to get yourself going with your hydrating, with your salts, with your, getting your arms moving. But then, by lunchtime, by early afternoon, by evening, actually you're maybe starting to feel a bit more okay and you're able to do a little bit more. But it took me a long time to realize that. I just thought, oh, I feel terrible in the morning, therefore I need to push myself through it, which,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, it's not a good idea.
I know. I was thinking that when I got on the call today at 11 o'clock, I was like, we could have done ourselves both a favor and done the afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating though how much data you can collect and how it can be really, really useful. What do you think about and again, this is going to be different person to person, I'm sure, but the sort of using data in a useful way to help ourselves versus the kind of hypervigilance that it can bring out in us? Because some of the time you think, well, I'm watching my heart rate, I'm watching it go up, oh my goodness, it's going up, and you can kind of get yourself into this kind of vicious cycle. And it's like, where's the line between it being really useful and it helping us and it actually not?
Yeah, so I totally agree. And this all comes back to that earlier point where I said, like, we're quite careful about how much we're asking people to engage in the app. And there are some decisions that we've already made, like the first device that we're integrating with is a Polar device that doesn't have a screen. So it actually stops you from that like hypervigilance and like that and anxiety inducing of being able to see your heart rate the whole time, which actually sometimes can not be helpful. So yeah, it's something that we think about a lot, and we're going to continue to work on. And I think the temptation as we build Visible will always to add more features, add more capabilities, and we've got to be careful that we're always doing that with everyone's like health comes first, like both physical and mental. So taking that into account is crucial. Totally agree. Something we think about a lot of Visible.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I'm one of these people that wants to know things. I want answers. I want to know everything. So I'm the sort of person that would be like, oh, data. Oh, isn't this wonderful? I can look at all of this. And, and it would be really useful up to the point where I then took it too far and it ended up being not helpful. And, not everybody is like me, thank goodness. But it's going to be something, I guess, maybe that people have to work out for themselves a bit as well. Bit of autonomy there.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of future plans? You mentioned having the data being able to be available to people like researchers. And you said there's loads of exciting stuff going on. How much of that are you able to talk about?
Yeah, so we've got some exciting conversations happening in the background to allow people to share their Visible data very easily and directly with researchers. And people who've used the app will see that tucked away, there is already a section in the app. And right now we have a study that's going through ethics with Imperial College London. And I mentioned that the menstrual cycle, and we all know this in the community, has a massive impact on symptoms. But this isn't in published research. And so we can use the Visible data to get those insights into the research community. And so we're working with Dr. Victoria Mail at Imperial College, and she's studying that, which is really exciting. And we have more studies lined up with other research institutions and non-profits that we'll be adding soon. And I hope we can make a big announcement about that in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Because like you say, it's all that stuff that we know, like you just said about the menstrual cycle impacting on symptoms. We all know that because we've experienced it. And if you haven't physically experienced it, you know it because you've seen it in support groups or from other people mentioning it. But it's not something that is kind of talked about so much in the research community. So it's all very anecdotal. But if you can collect it more in terms of actually physically having the data, it's kind of like, here, I'm going to present you this research study on a plate. Now, please go and make it.
Yeah, exactly. And we're already tracking all this stuff for ourselves anyway. So why not make the most of this data and share it with people that can move the science forwards?
Yeah, definitely. Is this something that people can opt in and out of?
Yes. Yeah. So it always default opted out. And yeah, you can opt in within the app and you go through a consent form. So when you sign up to Visible, you're not tied into any research at all. So all your data is protected. It's only when you choose to opt in with researchers. And even when you opt in to share it with them, it's all anonymized as well.
Of course, yeah. You said that the Visible Plus is being beta tested at the moment. What are your plans to kind of roll that out more kind of fully? That's the word.
Yeah, so we have an early access program. So we've got a wait list where we're currently emailing people like every couple of weeks, and we bring on a few more people onto it. But we really want to make sure that we're like giving the right guidance, that it's not too draining to use. We're getting that right balance of guidance versus too much tracking. And so we've been quite slow compared to the free app in expanding that group, but we are working as hard as we can to get that available to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, because we've quite a long wait list.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be an awful lot of people wanting to come on board. But it's really great that you are listening to people and you're getting this kind of feedback almost kind of in real time, aren't you? And you're able to really listen to that. Whereas I suppose if you had it open to too many people, then the feedback would be a bit more overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually have within the app, both free and Invisible Plus, the ability for you to message the team directly through the profile section, and you usually get a response in 24 hours. We read all the messages and always reply to every one of them. So if anyone does have feedback who's using the app, then they can directly get in contact with us, which is really awesome. And certainly it's quite a bit of work, but it's so worth it. And I would say that's probably like the limiting factor on Visible Plus is how much support we can provide. And we don't have a very big team. And so we're slightly limited in that sense because, when we build new stuff, within Visible Plus, what comes with that is usually a lot of bugs, a lot of questions, which takes a bit of time for us to get through those and be able to respond to everyone.
Yes, that's more hours in development to then fix those new features.
Yeah, exactly.
But it must be so worth it. I mean, I guess you must see this kind of day to day, the work that you've put in and the thing that you have kind of been involved in developing with your team, and seeing the people that it's benefiting and getting the feedback from them must be pretty cool.
It is incredibly motivating. So, I mentioned half our team have these conditions. I mean, they're already super motivated, actually, but the other half who weren't as exposed to these conditions before they joined Visible, it's really motivating for them to get these messages through on like how much of a difference like Visible is making to some people's journeys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's amazing.
We've got over 25,000 people who have joined the platform in the last 4 months, and that is all purely through word of mouth. And with that means that we've got, last time I checked, like 20 million rows of data on these conditions. And we're starting to see patterns already. I mean, already we updated our morning stability score just this week, and that is 3 times more accurate than the first version that we launched, which only was using a month's worth of data. So we are seeing like the larger the data set we get, the more accurate we're able to make our algorithms. And so that's been awesome. So the more people that use it, the more people that join, the more accurate, the better Visible becomes. So a big thank you to like the community for supporting what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's one of those things where the more you put in, the more you get out.
No, it's awesome, and it's so fantastic that we've got some incredible data scientists that are looking at this data set, and I'm really excited that in the future we'll be able to share it with researchers.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been so much fun chatting to you and fascinating to hear about how you're kind of using your experiences and helping others and making this whole thing. So thank you so much, and all the best with the next kind of stage and everything, and of course with your own recovery.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jackie, for having me on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.